Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Neil Barclay, who serves as president and CEO of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Good to see you again.
Well, it is so great to see you again. I, of course, have been so honored over literally decades to be able to witness firsthand your leadership, the way that you have impacted institutions, communities, our field as a whole. So it really is a deep honor for me to be able to have you on the show, to be able to partner with the Wright Museum. So just thank you for being here.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
So, one of the things that I thought would be great if we could, kind of get your insights from your unique leadership roles that you had with a host of institutions and, of course, in more recent times at the Wright Museum. But, BIPOC organizations overall, there has been kind of, people talk about this sea change over the past maybe 3 to 4 years, and there's been an increase, it seems, in interest for BIPOC organizations and or for those organizations that focus on different business models. But there's also, of course, unique challenges. And I know there's many in our audience who either are in the process of trying to build such an organization or are looking at certain aspects of their own institutions that they want to transform or evolve. And so just wondering, I guess, first and foremost, kind of, do you have any general thoughts about that? And also any kind of the key challenges that you think really exist?
Well, what's happened in the past few years is that we've seen at least some increased funding to BIPOC organizations. I think that's been good because it focuses on, sort of the financial sustainability and stability, frankly, of our organizations. My work has increasingly, though, looked at two different aspects of that sort of trend in our field. One has to do with leadership, right? And the other has to do with business models. So maybe I'll separate those two. The work I've been doing on leadership comes from working in a lot of different kinds of organizations. As you know, I worked in large educational institutions. I've worked at smaller contemporary art centers, I'll just say. Now I'm working in the museum world. So I've worked in a lot of different kinds of organizations. And what strikes me about them is they all hew to one model that privileges folks with money, frankly. And not that I'm opposed to folks with money, right? But the reality is a lot of our organizations, our boards, our communities are not moneyed communities. And so what I'm thinking a lot about these days is, are there models out there that uplift how BIPOC organizations, I'm speaking more generally now, have been successful? For example, our emphasis on community engagement, our emphasis on intergenerational learning and support and leadership, right? Our emphasis, frankly, before it became fashionable, on diversity, because our communities, even within say African-American community, are no longer monolithic. And we see that just looking who's living around us, right? And so are there models out there that we can begin to introduce to the field that really talk about those elements of our real business models that have allowed us to be sustainable without having the kinds of resources that some of our other organizations might have? This is not at the expense of getting those resources, but in terms of trying to analyze, as philanthropy does, what organizations will be successful, to look more at those elements, in our organizations to see where additional investment might really pay off. And so I'm thinking a lot about that.
Gotcha.
I think Go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah, no,
Yeah,
I was going to say, so say there's, someone in our audience who's looking at their organization and they're wanting to think about this, and they're thinking something along the lines of, well, yeah, so I want to do that, but I need these, grants from these five big donors and or funders, et cetera. And they either want me to do this, or I know this is where their priorities are, et cetera, right? What would your suggestions be to those leaders who are trying to balance what could be kind of a day-to-day reality for them of funding with kind of this long-term sustainability? Any kind of suggestions or guidance that you would have?
I mean, my fundamental guidance is, in my experience, money and support follows a vision. And so I think the strength and your ability to articulate what your unique vision is for your organization and why that contributes to maybe a larger ecosystem is what draws money to you, right? You have to have a big idea. And I don't mean big idea in terms of scale necessarily. I just mean something that's like, when people hear it, go, wow, I never thought of that. Or that's interesting, right? And I think we have to come from a place of personal vision to make anybody follow us. There's too many other people around that they could follow, right? And I think donors of philanthropy, they gravitate to people who have a vision about what they're doing, have an idea, have maybe a unique approach to it, right? Our work in, for example, sustainability is pretty unique for an African-American museum, right? But we're trying to lift up the conversation within Black and BIPOC organizations about the effect of the environment, not just on our homelands and all of that, but on the work we do as cultural workers as well, right? And so that's been an important innovation, if you will, for us, right? So I think that that's really what I would tell anybody, in this, moving to the point I was making about leadership. The work I'm developing about leadership really starts there, because I think a person, whether you're trying to create a big organization or a small organization, you need to really understand what your vision is for that. Why is it different from the hundreds of other organizations that are out there? What is it you're trying to achieve? And how does that connect to who you are and what you're about and what you've been about, that authenticity piece, right? You can't make that stuff up. You know what I mean? Donors, funders, whatever, see through all of that. It's like it's grant talk or it's whatever. You really need to get down to, I'm going to start an organization for X, Y, Z, because that's what I really care about. And I think it's important for that work to be done now.
Yeah.
And this is why. And I feel it. I understand it. And I might be the only person that understands it, right? But that passion comes across, right? I think, to others.
And so for any leaders, and especially emerging leaders out there who are looking at this and wanting this evolution of their own approach to their work, what resources or tools would you point them to say, as I'm going on this journey, I'm looking for, help, support, some guidance, and what suggestions would you have in terms of resources and tools?
In my career, my resources and tools have been my colleagues primarily, right? People that I have befriended or who have befriended me, or who have seen it clear to support the work that I've done, to constantly check in with them, to get feedback from them, to find out, to think, to ask what they think about what I'm trying to do. They've been invaluable. I can't even tell you how many times I've called up someone and said, how did you deal with this, right? So I would say building that network as an emerging leader is critical. And frankly, you don't know, actually, as you go through the field, who ends up being an important part of that network, right? If you think about it, Aaron, when we started out years ago, we didn't know that we were going to end up where we are today, right? but we've been friends that whole time. We've talked that whole time. We've been inspired by each other's work that whole time. And now we're in positions really to further each other's work. You know what I mean? And I think that's how it works. You know, there are relationships that you build throughout your career that end up being your greatest asset as you continue to evolve as a leader, right? Which I do want to talk just a second or a little bit about this idea I have about leadership. I might have talked about it last time we talked. And, you know, I think one of the things that's missing in our leadership training is the experiential piece. And I think about that because I think, Aaron, as you know, I trained as an attorney. I call myself a recovering attorney at this point. I've gone through the program where I'm over it. But it is one of the most valuable, by the way, though, education that I received. A lot of it was in the law. It helped me a lot in terms of how I think about things. But this notion that if you're a doctor or a lawyer, you go through all of this training, but then you have to have a residency or a clerkship to really understand how all of that knowledge you have swimming around your head works in practice and the real practical implications of that knowledge. And so I've really been thinking a lot about that for our field and how we might construct something that gives leaders that opportunity to shadow, to work with senior leaders, you know, in our field, and really see what it's like to sit in the desk and in the roles that we sit in. Because I think, and I think you might agree, it's kind of counterintuitive. You know, it's great, I love it, but it's not exactly what you think it is. When you think, I want to be an executive director, I want to be the boss. You know what I mean? Well, you sit there and you go, but I don't know about, you know, you need to know all of that. And that's part of it. And that's part of the challenges and the opportunities of being in these roles, right? But seeing it, I think, is really important for leaders because I think particularly younger people who haven't been in these roles, they have a critique of how we operate in the field that the way I receive it often is like, yeah, but you haven't gone through all the different kinds of, which you may still have the same opinion after you do that, but I would love for you to have that experience and see if you see it the same way, you know.
Those pieces are so critical, so critically important.
Yeah.
And I think that, yes, if that really existed, it could be very empowering for our field. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time. But as you know, I always like to ask of all my guests, kind of this type of work and the leadership work you're doing at the Wright, there's got to be some tougher days when things just don't seem to be coming together, or there's some insurmountable challenges. As a leader, what would you share to emerging leaders of, here's what I do during those tough times that gives me strength or gives me wisdom or guidance or comfort during tough times of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just like, again, remembering why you're doing any of it, right? Because I think in those tough times, you get embroiled in whatever that issue is, whatever that challenge is, and it can be all consuming, right? And sometimes it's something you have to go through, but doesn't have really anything to do with where you're ultimately going, right? And I think, you know, spending too much time in that moment can deflect you from getting to the place that you really want to be at in terms of your vision and the why of what you're doing, right? I think that's so important. I also think, you know, it's important to disengage sometimes, you know, just let it go, you know, go away, don't think about it, don't do it. I mean, people say this all the time, but one of my mentors literally took my keys to the office when I went on vacation, because she knew that, you know, if forgot to do something, I would come in, spend a couple hours on the computer. That's when you had to go in to do work, right? But she said, no, you just need to let it go for a while. And I think that's really important.
Neil Barclay, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for everything you've done as a mentor for me. And thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I appreciate it. I really do.